2023 was a rather quiet year for cameras, but the same won't be said for 2024. Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, and Fujifilm are all expected to refresh their lineups and introduce new models. So what can we expect from them, and when? Well, stick around after this short message for all the details. But first, subscribe to this channel for a chance to win a Canon EOS R5. I'll be giving one away to one lucky subscriber once this channel reaches 100,000 subscribers. Anyone above the age of 18 with a valid mailing address is eligible. Additional terms and conditions are linked in the description down below. Fujifilm Rumors has been forecasting at least 3 cameras to be released in Q1 of 2024. The next camera is supposed to be the GFX 100S Mark II, followed by a successor to the X100V. And based on previous statements made by Panasonic staff, the X Pro 4, the XE5, and the XT40 refresh is also expected, but not yet confirmed. But leaks will flow as we get closer to any sort of announcement. Panasonic released the S5 Mark II and the 2X in January of 2024. It was their first mirrorless camera to have a phase detect autofocus system, leading many to believe that Panasonic would refresh not only the S1 but the S1R and the S1H shortly thereafter. Various sources came forward stating that a refresh would come soon. After all, it's been 5 years since Panasonic announced the S1 and the S1R. And while Panasonic has been quiet on the matter, with 5 years since we got the S1 and the S1R, the competitive landscape in that segment has changed dramatically. Back in, 2019, when we had the announcement of the S1 and the S1R, there wasn't a single camera, a stills hybrid camera on the market that could do, 8K RAW, 8K up to 60 frames per second, that could do 20 frames per second lossless RAW. But today, there's about at least 6 or 7 cameras that can do that. And with a refresh expected by Nikon, Canon, Sony, and others, I'd be really surprised if Panasonic doesn't announce an S1 and an S1R follow-up, or at the very least an S1H follow-up, because if they don't, if they make us wait another year, making it 6 years, I think they're going to start to bleed some customers. The Nikon Z6 Mark III is another camera that's due to be announced in early 2024. Speculation is rampant on the specifications, but nothing credible has come forward. However, there is a meeting scheduled for the end of January, and this meeting's for influencers, leading many to predict that the Nikon Z6 Mark III announcement won't be far behind. Nikon is also expected to announce a follow-up to the Nikon Z9, but this one being a low-resolution, high-speed camera designed for scenarios at the Paris 2024 Olympics. The Z9H, as it's being called, will have half the pixels as the Nikon Z9, placing it at around 22 to 24 megapixels. And that lines up really well with the recently announced Sony A9 Mark III, but also the Canon EOS R3, which was announced a few years earlier. They're both around, the low 20 megapixels, but they're designed for capturing high-speed, fast-action type photography. And while the video specs are pretty good, these are fast-action photography cameras first and foremost. So it sounds like the Nikon Z9H, if that's what it's going to be called, is going to be targeting this segment. So what about the price? Well, we just have to wait and see on that, but looking at the price of the Sony A9 Mark III at $59.98 with a global shutter, and the Canon EOS R3 at $49.99, $1,000 off, it's very likely that the Nikon Z9H is going to come under the price of the Sony, but a little bit higher than the price of the Canon EOS R3. After all, the Nikon Z9 did come out with a price of $54.99 or $54.98, $1,000 less than the Sony Alpha 1, and of course $1,000 less than the old Canon flagship model, the 1DX Mark III, at $65 or $64.99. So I would expect the Z9H to be priced at a midpoint between those cameras, those 3 cameras, and I'm really excited to see what might happen. But specifications, again, even date is rather, nebulous at this point. However, in terms of the date, I really would expect, because we've already got the Paris Olympics, we know when they're going to be held, they're going to be in late July, So any sort of announcement is probably going to happen, well, maybe it could be Q1, CP Plus is coming up, but something definitely needs to happen before the end of May. And speaking of the Sony A9 Mark III, which was announced in late 2023, Sony stated that the A9 Mark III will be released in the spring of 2024. But if we take a look at B&H, we can see that the estimated ship date is actually now down to February the 21st, 2024. And that's significant because that is one day before CP Plus in Japan, the largest photo and video trade show, is supposed to take place. It's running from February the 22nd to February the 25th. But the A9 Mark III won't be the only Sony release. While predictions of the A7S IV have been widely discredited for the first quarter of 2024, Sony Alpha Rumor says that we will be getting an FX camera announcement in Q1. And the ZV-E10 successor is also coming in the first half of 2024, and the A9 Mark II and the Sony A7S IV might show up in the second half, but that's rated at a 60% probability. Canon has largely completed the refresh of their mirrorless camera lineup, but unlike the competition, Canon has left their flagship mirrorless camera to last. Canon is expected to begin a long tease of the EOS R1, starting sometime in Q1, which could be as early as mid-January. And like all the other cameras that I've talked about here, there's absolutely nothing credible. There's nothing directly from the source talking about specifications or the date. However, Canon has come out publicly and stated that they are developing and working on the Canon EOS R1. They said this camera, they're taking feedback from customers of the Canon EOS R3 and they're using it in that camera. Now, one thing to kind of help project what we could see in terms of specifications, both stills and video, all we have to do is take a look at the 5 series, because the 1 series has always had better video and stills capabilities than the 5 series. So if we want to look at the Canon EOS R5 as a baseline, well, you can imagine that the R1 is going to be better than the R5 in pretty well every way, including a stack sensor, a resolution probably somewhere around 45 megapixels, but Canon could boost that to 50 or even 60. But a stack sensor with better lossless RAW shooting, a faster camera able to produce and capture images a whole lot faster, and to be able to do them in high resolution at somewhere around 45 megapixels would make this, well, a very significant camera. And with recent speed increasements in the storage specs, CF Express Type B can now do with Gen 4 up to around 3 to 3.6 gigabytes per second. However, there's only a couple of manufacturers that are currently producing Gen 4, but I wouldn't be surprised if the EOS R1 can at least handle the speeds. Whether the cards are present and available at the time of announcement, that's another thing coming. But ProGrade does have one out right now, and it's not exactly cheap, but it's not exactly expensive either. Not if we consider the price of those CF Express Type B cards when they first came out. In fact, when I bought my Canon EOS R5, I also brought a ProGrade 325 gigabyte Cobalt card. And that card at the time, for 325 gigabytes, was $700, just to put things into perspective. But the Canon EOS R1 isn't the only big announcement planned by Canon in Q1 of 2023. The Canon EOS R5 Mark II is expected to be announced on the heels of CP Plus in Japan, which, as I mentioned earlier, is taking place on February the 22nd to the 25th. And while the Camera Insider has published supposed leaked specifications on the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, along with Canon rumors, we don't have any validation and the specs keep changing. And the latest says it's going to have a 62 megapixel stacked full-frame sensor. And sure, that sounds great, but we've seen rumors of 45, 60, 61, and of course 62. And again, if we go back to Black Friday of 2022, Canon rumors said that, yeah, it's going to be a 61 megapixel sensor. We've seen so many different specifications on the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. Now, these do seem to be the most credible, or at least the most plausible. Bumping up the resolution to 8K 60 for video, but 4K at 120 frames per second, that's no different from the Mark I. Unless, of course, Canon's now allowing oversampling from 4K past 30 frames per second all the way up to 120, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if that 4K gets bumped up from 120 to something like 150 or 180. And of course, a new Digic X image processor is expected, but dual CF Express Type B card slots, while welcomed, I'd be really surprised if Canon decides to put that in this camera. After all, the competition isn't doing it. The Nikon Z8 has a single CF Express type card slot, and other than the Nikon Z9 and the 1DX Mark III, there isn't a single camera on the market that has dual CF Express Type B card slots, and those aforementioned cameras are all selling for a price north of $5,500. But the rest of the specifications here on the Camera Insider, they look certainly plausible, something we could expect to see on the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. But those aren't the only two announcements we're expecting from Canon. We're also expecting Canon to announce a bunch of Prime Series lenses, some super telephotos and some zooms. The 200 to 500, for example, a 24mm, a 35mm f1.2. But the real big announcement that is supposed to be happening sometime in February is a big Sigma announcement. A big Sigma announcement concerning RF lenses. Does this mean it's going to completely open up the mount for Sigma to produce lenses for the Canon RF mount? What about Tamron and others? Well, we really don't know, but at this point, both Sony Alpha rumors and Canon rumors are talking about this, that a big announcement is coming for Canon on the RF mount regarding Sigma. But have you noticed anything strange about all the cameras that we've talked about in this video? Despite all the chatter, despite all the forecasting, despite all the supposed leaked images and specifications, nothing has been validated, nothing has been confirmed. The only thing we have is really coming from, well, Panasonic and Canon, where previous staff have talked about development for, well, a product line, at least when it comes to, I think it was Panasonic and maybe even Fujifilm. Various staff have talked about their roadmap and what they plan to release in the next coming years. Yes, it was Fujifilm, that's right, and those three cameras that I talked about earlier. And then, of course, Canon talking about the R1. Now, that's not really a surprise after all when you consider that Canon releases a new 1 Series camera like clockwork in time for the Summer Olympics every 4 years, and the Paris Olympics are coming up. It's not really any surprise that a new 1 Series camera is coming out. The only question is when. And of course, what are the specifications for this camera? That's one thing that we really don't know at this point. But again, all you have to do to get a good idea of what the R1 can do is take a look at the Canon EOS R5 as a baseline, and then give it a stacked sensor, then give it increased speed and capacity to be able to shoot high-speed continuous RAW, not just for stills, but for also video. And then consider it's going to have dual CF Express Type B card slots that will most likely be able to take advantage of, well, Gen 4 speeds. Now, in terms of how fast it can go, will it go to 30 frames per second, 40 frames per second, 60 frames per second? It's all conjecture at this point. We don't have anything else, but as New Year's is just around the corner, I wouldn't be surprised if we start getting some leaks and announcements very, very soon. I suspect that January and February are going to be very, very busy months. I'm going to be putting out at least 1 video a day, and sometimes maybe even 2 or 3 videos. It's going to be absolutely crazy. So if you want to stay up to date on all the latest camera gear news and rumors, definitely go ahead and subscribe, but also follow me on Twitter, where I'm constantly tweeting out stories that aren't quite, well, big enough to have their own separate videos, such as pricing information. We've seen incredible price discounts, over $1,000 off on Panasonic S1H, depending on which kit package you get, as well as the body alone. The Canon EOS R5 and R5C, $900 off, $700 off the Sony A7 III. Some really great deals out there. And if you're looking at purchasing any cameras that I've talked about or lenses that I've talked about that have been announced and released in this video, then please consider using my affiliate links down below in the description. These ones right here, because it really does help this channel grow. It enables me to purchase new and exciting lenses like the Canon 200 to 800mm, the 100 to 500mm, the Canon EOS R5, and of course all the kit going around and supporting this channel and all these lenses behind me. And for those of you that have helped me in 2022 by using my affiliate links, thank you so much. It means an awful lot to me. It's enabled me to turn this into a business. And while I haven't retired from my day job, while this is still a bit of a hobby for me, it's now an incorporated business. I'm now serious about this. And who knows, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, could this become my day job? Could I retire from my former day job as being an enterprise architect? We'll just have to wait and see, but it's possible. I was really surprised by the growth in 2022, a really huge year, not just in terms of subscribers and views, but in revenue, enough that I take this seriously, enough that I had to hire an accountant to do the taxes and all that sort of stuff. but I'm really excited and I'm planning to go to trade shows. I don't know if I'll make it to NAB 2024 this year. It's probably already too late to get a hotel room, let alone a flight, but I've got my eyes on CP Plus 2025, NAB 2025. I'm really excited by the growth and where this channel could go. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for using my affiliate links, for commenting, and just being a regular viewer. Thank you so much. But that's it for now. Have yourself a great weekend. And of course, a very happy and prosperous new year. May she be better than the previous one. Cheers. We'll see you again soon.